Good evening. My name is Marisa Bono, Chief Strategic Officer for Via Metropolitan Transit. Oprima Estrella Cero, ahora para escuchar en español. Thank you for joining our live interactive Tele-Town Hall as we host an open conversation about Via Metropolitan Transit and equity here in San Antonio. This event and others will give us a chance to speak directly with you and answer as many of your questions as possible. For our phone participants, we'd like to invite you to watch the live stream by visiting keepsamoving.com. Scroll down to the streaming player toward the bottom of the page. Tonight, we're focusing our conversation on how transit serves as a tool for social equity. San Antonio holds the dubious distinction of being one of the most economically segregated cities in the country. It's a list that our city has long been on, but many of our local leaders are working hard every day to make systemic changes that would help us move forward. Well before the COVID-19 crisis hit, Black and Latino San Antonians faced poverty rates twice as high as their white counterparts. According to an editorial in an August 19 edition of the San Antonio Express News, more than a quarter of the workers in our region make less than $25,000 annually, and 2/3 earn less than $50,000 annually. What does that mean for our community, and what does it mean for transit? Our panel this evening is well versed in these issues, so we're looking forward to a good conversation, and we hope you'll dial *3 to enter the queue to ask live questions on this call. Otra vez, oprima estrella cero, ahora para escuchar en español. With me this evening, I have Jeff Arndt, President and CEO of Via Metropolitan Transit, Lily Casura, a research and demography expert and the former Director of Equity for the YWCA, and Representative Diego Bernal, the representative for Texas House District 123. And before Representative Bernal served on the legislature, he was also a member of the San Antonio City Council representing District 1. Thanks for being with us this evening, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
As I mentioned, this is an interactive forum, and we would love to hear from you. We'll be taking as many questions from participants as we possibly can live on this event. Oprima estrella cero, ahora para escuchar en español. Now, if you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time. You're going to be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. After that, the next time you hear your name, you will be live on the call and you'll be able to ask your question directly to our panelists. And if you're streaming the event on the website, you can simply type your name and question below the streaming player. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Diego, I'd like to start with you. You've long been a champion for vulnerable communities in our city, even going back to your days on District 1 as the District 1 councilman when you became a champion for the non-discrimination ordinance and consequently faced a government recall. And over time, equity has become such a buzzword in San Antonio. And, of course, it's refreshing to have someone who's willing to put themselves on the line like that to defend our vulnerable communities. It seems like every time someone uses that word equity, it means different things to different people. In your experience, what does it mean to you? And for the purposes of our conversation, what does it mean for the purpose of transit?
Yeah, thank you, Marisa. Thanks for having me. It's a good question. I think when it comes to transportation, it's really the connective tissue between where people are and where they should or want or need to be, whether that's educational opportunities, employment opportunities, or just opportunity in general. I think a big piece of equity and social justice is the opportunity gap. But you said something earlier that I want to hone in on that I think is really important. We are the most economically segregated city in the country. But beyond that, we're also, at least mathematically, the poorest. We have the highest percent of people living below the federal poverty line, the highest percent of children, and the highest percent of young children, 0 to 5. And so when you have a problem that is that big, the only way that you can really address it, the only way that you can meet it, is with a solution that's equally as large. And what that means is you can't just create programs or pilots. You have to work at the systems level. Systems are the only way that you can address a problem or a series of problems that are that large. And so what's really important about transit, in this case, is we're literally talking about a system. A system-wide approach can help solve a system-wide problem and move people literally at scale. You can move a few if you want and feel good about yourself, but you're really not making a dent. The only way to really make a dent when you've got a challenge as large as ours is to work at the systems level. So moving people to opportunity, allowing them to pursue their dreams, to take advantage of opportunities, and to give them the same opportunities that other people have, transit plays a tremendous role in that. So it's a system-wide problem, and transit offers one part of a system-wide solution.
Thank you for that. Jeff, you just heard Representative Bernal lay out his perspective on the intersection between transit and social equity. He's recommending that to address systematic poverty and systematic segregation, that we need to look at systems that are scalable. And can you talk a little bit about how VIA perceives its role in this movement for social equity? And how does VIA's Keep SA Moving plan, how is that plan designed to address some of these issues?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. First of all, I'll just let everyone out there know that if you want to sound smart, you should never follow Diego Bernal. Tough act to follow, but I will give it my best.
Agreed.
So first of all, on a personal note, and I think the vast majority of people who work for VIA would say the very same thing. What's particularly satisfying about working for VIA is knowing that we are meeting very essential needs of the people that use our system. And we are helping people hopefully overcome that opportunity gap. And every day, on a pre-COVID day, we carry over 100,000 boardings among 400 buses. Now, I know that oftentimes you hear the rhetoric, the buses are always empty. If you take the division of 110,000 boardings across 400 buses in a day, you'll see that no, in fact, on an average, every bus is carrying 22 to 24 people every hour. And so we're really meeting a lot of those needs. Now, part of the challenge, though, in public transportation is the level of service that we can offer. And so I'd like to kind of go back to Diego's opportunity gap, because there is also a mobility gap that's associated with people who don't have cars, frankly, and people who are fairly reliant on public transportation. And it looks like this. If you live in the poorest census tract in Bexar County, and you're willing to spend 45 minutes a day commuting one way, if you have a car, you can get to nearly any job in the county in 45 minutes. If you don't have a car and you rely upon transit, you only have access to 10% of the job opportunity. And that, of course, goes across to medical opportunities, educational opportunities. And so the Keep SA Moving plan is really designed, if you will, to broaden that reach so that people have a much broader reach of opportunity. And that includes increasing frequency along our bus routes so that, for example, if you transfer, you don't end up waiting long periods of time. It shortens your commute time. We are still advancing advanced rapid transit. That's one way that you really open markets, because, as it says, it's rapid transit. It moves you more quickly through the system. And then never forget that Via Trans is an important element of what we do. And the people who use Via Trans are either physically or cognitively not able to ride the fixed route system. And many of them rely nearly 100% on Via Trans services. But then the second piece of the plan is, how do we get people around when we get outside of the core? Because there is an imbalance between where people live and where they're trying to get opportunity to work, for example. And that goes to something Diego, we did pilot this, successfully piloted, and now we want to make it far more systemic, as you suggested, and that is our Via Link service. And so in areas of lower density where roadway networks are not necessarily fully connected, we are currently offering in one area of town, in the northeast area of town, something that looks a lot like rideshare, like an Uber or Lyft, but it's supported through Via. And it will take you anywhere within that region for the price of a bus fare. And it will connect you to the Via system for the price of the bus fare. And just this past year, I'm happy and proud to say VIA eliminated the upcharge for transfers. So that makes it a lot more economical for people to make those trips.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And just a reminder for those of you who just joined us, we do have about 1,200 callers on the line right now. If you just joined us, this is a live interactive event. You can ask your question to our panelists, Representative Diego Bernal, Jeff Arndt, the president and CEO of VIA, and Lily Casura, an expert demographer and researcher. Just press *3, and a member of our staff will screen your call. And the next time you hear your name, you'll be live to ask your question. And Jeff, you alluded to a good point, and that is who the VIA rider is. I know in the community, I hear a lot of misperceptions about who rides VIA. And we know from a 2019 survey that we conducted at VIA that 72% of our riders are employed, usually full-time. They use VIA 5 to 7 days a week and usually work at least one weekend day. 67% live below the poverty threshold, earning less than $25,000 a year. And almost 60% have no personally owned car or vehicle in the household. So they're relying on VIA to get to where they need to go. Lily Casura, you hold a master's in social work. You have degrees from UTSA and Harvard University, where you graduated with honors. And you recently served as the Director of Equity and Impact at the YWCA San Antonio. We're talking about transit and equity tonight. Tell us a little bit more about your research and why you have chosen to focus your professional efforts on equity in our city.
As everyone has been saying, equity is a crucial issue that characterizes San Antonio, the need for it. And I've lived in a number of big cities in the US, and transportation here links so many opportunities, or the lack of it prevents people from being able to do more with their lives. So you see it in everything from education to healthcare, people being concerned about aging family members and literally leaving work or school to take them to the doctors. It's pervasive. Even in domestic violence, you see the need for greater access to transportation. So I think when it comes to San Antonio, it's one of the 2 or 3 most crucial topics that would really advance us as a city and help our residents be able to achieve a whole lot more and embrace better opportunities.
Thank you for that. And I see that we have a live caller who would like to join us. William, go ahead. You're live with our panelists.
Hello, my name is William Long. I grew up in San Antonio, and I'm aware of the invisible economic divisions in our community and that public transportation can help address our local economic disparities. With the Keep SA Moving Plan, VIA is addressing those structural inequities by expanding night and weekend service and increasing frequency. I fully support the Keep SA Moving Plan, and I encourage everyone listening to join me in voting yes for transit in the November election. We need to promote better access to opportunities, particularly for the most vulnerable segments of the population, and that's why I'm voting yes for transit in November.
Well, thank you for that, William. William, our caller, just referenced the Keep SA Moving Plan, and we're going to get into what exactly that plan is in just a moment. But first, if you just joined us, we do have over 1,300 participants online with us this evening. If you just joined us, this is a live forum. You can ask your question live if you press *3 on your keypad, and you can get in the queue to ask a question. And I'll go ahead and go to our first poll question. And while we tally the results, we can talk about the Keep SA Moving Plan. So the question is, which do you think is the most important element of the Keep SA Moving Plan? We haven't heard too many details about that yet, but we'd like to know from you which of these sounds like the most important element of VIA's Keep SA Moving Plan. Press 1 for support growth of economy and population. Press 2 for provide access to jobs. Press 3 for addressing service inequities. Again, the question is, which do you think is the most important element of the Keep SA Moving Plan? 1 for support growth of economy and population. press 2 for provide access to jobs, and 3 for addressing service inequities. And while we tally those results, Jeff, our last caller referenced VIA's Keep SA Moving Plan. Can you tell us in a nutshell, what is VIA's Keep SA Moving Plan?
Oh, sure. I can tell you in 3 words. Frequent,
okay.
fast, and flexible. Frequent, fast, and flexible. So the frequency, of course, refers to what I mentioned earlier, which is, we currently have a large section of our routes that operate 30-minute or 60-minute frequency. You can imagine the dismay you might feel if you needed to transfer to a route that only runs once every 60 minutes and you just missed that connection. You have another 60 minutes to wait for that connection. So in the core area that we serve, we're looking at increasing frequency along those major corridors. And that's in areas that have density and have roadway networks that support good use of public transportation. So that's the first piece. The fast piece refers to that second leg in specific, which is the advanced rapid transit leg. And advanced rapid transit is essentially, if you think of light rail without the rail, we have an exclusive running way. We have pathways on the street. And we would have, instead of having buses and electrification and all the expenses that come with that, we would be operating bus type vehicles in those corridors to stations to get people more quickly across town. So it would decrease the travel time, for example, to get to a job up in the North Star Mall area. So that's the fast. And then the flexible. The flexible has to do a great deal with the application of technology to our services, both apps and those kinds of things and information, but also the via link type service where you're able to arrange a trip anywhere within your zone. You get response typically in an 8 to 10 minute period where you used to have an hour between buses. And then you can also connect to that high frequency network that we're talking about in the middle. Now I think that William mentioned increasing the span of service, increasing weekend service. I just have to share, and then I promise I'll stop. I have to share a story about span of service. So what was formerly the Brevard Report, now the San Antonio Report, covered the commute of a gentleman who lived up somewhat near the airport area, but had a job at a restaurant in Southtown. So, working in a restaurant, he got off work at 11 o'clock. And although he's on South Flores, which is fairly, just minutes from downtown, there's no bus service running at 11 o'clock. So he would walk from the area of Alamo and South Flores into downtown to pick up his bus. He would then take a 30-minute bus ride out to the North Star Mall area. But the bus that he would normally connect to get home, it's not running anymore either. And so he walks home from there. Now his home is 3 miles from North Star Center, and he's arriving at North Star at about 12:30 a.m. So he's going to walk home, in that very middle of the night hour because he doesn't have those opportunities. Now, as I said before, if he was going to constrain himself to where he could get in a very quick travel time on transit, he wouldn't be able to travel too far out of his neighborhood. And so we want to build a system that makes it possible for people to reach those kinds of opportunities. And whether that late night service would be offered with buses or more likely something more like a VIA Link service where we're going to leverage rideshare type services, we would still be providing that important access and that important opportunity.
Thank you for that. We have Representative Diego Bernal with us as one of our panelists this evening. Diego, I know that this is a time when the pandemic has hit a lot of communities hard. I'd love to hear your perspective on what transit has meant to your constituents during the pandemic, in line with Jeff's story just now.
Oh, I appreciate that. It means everything during this time, but I think it's fair to say it's always meant everything. In some ways, what the pandemic has done, what the coronavirus has done, is laid bare a lot of the challenges and inequalities that already exist in our city. It's brought them up to the surface. I keep thinking of that photo that we all know of the food bank 3 weeks into this. And then I thought to myself, and these are the people who can actually find cars to go, not the people who depend on the bus. So it means everything to them. I think that VIA's done an amazing job to keep service going, especially at the height of the virus. Hopefully it's completely behind us. We still have a ways to go, but hopefully the worst is behind us. But it means everything. And right now there are so many people, so many families, so many businesses hanging on by a thread. And if we didn't have the basic service that we have now, who knows what would happen? And one of the best ways to keep them going, to fortify them and move them literally to the next level, is to provide more. So I know a lot of folks who depend on VIA, but if we're being honest, they all agree that things could be better, they could be faster, they could be more reliable. And this time lays that out. So it'd be great for everyone if we could get them what they're asking for.
Thanks. I saw a study recently. I believe it was a study coming from the U.S. Census Bureau, but I could be wrong. But it stated that the transportation is the second highest household cost after housing, rent, and mortgage. So certainly if you don't have a reliable vehicle in the home, it impacts the household budget in more ways than one. It's the budget, but it's also access to employment opportunities and frankly, just access to healthcare and food and all of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so I have the poll results back from our first poll. The question was, which do you think is the most important element of the Keep SA Moving plan? And 38% of our participants said that they think supporting growth of economy and population is the most important element. 30% of our participants say providing access to jobs is the most important element. And 32% said addressing service inequities. So pretty equal distribution there. It sounds like the elements are equally important to our participants this evening. Lily Casura, we have Lily Casura with us. She has a master's in social work. She's an expert demographer and researcher. She has degrees from UTSA and Harvard University. Lily, in 2018, you conducted a community needs assessment report here in San Antonio. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that report is and what conclusions you were able to draw about transit and equity in San Antonio?
Yeah, happy to do that. So this is an initiative that goes back to the LBJ administration and the war on poverty. And there's a part of the city that is kind of the federal agency for this issue. And every 3 years, they're tasked with doing a community needs assessment that's very comprehensive, but the focus is really low-income residents. And what you're supposed to do is survey the population and figure out what the top needs are as people express them. And then we went a step further. This was back in 2018, the last time it was mandated. And we decided to also survey all the nonprofits and agencies in town who provide services to low-income residents. And we figured that between the two, we would get a good sense of what the obstacles are. We literally asked people, do you feel like you have any barriers to success in your life? Do you have one main one, or do you have several ones? And this was actually just asking the people themselves, and transportation was very, very high on that list. And then when we asked the agencies and service providers, the goal was to say, even if you don't provide the service that people come through your doors and ask for, what are the most popular things that your clients or possible clients are asking you for? And once again, transportation was the number one basic need. And it was number one for agencies that worked with people who have disabilities. It was number two for agencies that worked with seniors, both transportation and mobility. For agencies and nonprofits that work with single parents, particularly single moms, it was number three on the list. There's just no limit to how important this is to really the fabric of who lives in San Antonio. And many, many people told their stories about how it's impacting their lives.
Thank you for that. You have what? Go ahead.
Sorry, I think because part of the issue too is in a city that has fairly low wages, you have people who are working 2 and 3 jobs to try to make ends meet. And if you think of single parents doing that, I mean, people are criticized for not doing more with education, but the question is, do they really even have time or bandwidth left after they are spending so much time trying to get to their jobs and keep their jobs. So
Sure, it's certainly hard to work 2 or 3 jobs when it takes an hour or 2 just to get to one. Again, folks, this is an interactive forum. We have about 1,500 participants with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who just joined, this is an interactive forum. We want to hear your questions. If you have a question, press *3 on your keypad at any time. You'll get in the queue to ask your question. A member of our staff will greet you, and then the next time you hear your name, you'll be live with our panelists. If you're participating online, you can submit your question below the streaming player. And I'd like to go now to a live caller. Patricia, go ahead. You're live.
Oh, thank you so much. I am 88 years old and anticipate not being able to drive, say, in 2021, certainly not in 2022. I live in the suburbs, and all of a sudden it occurs to me, I won't have a car. I won't have transportation. On a fixed income, I will have a problem with calling Lyft or Uber or whoever when I want to go somewhere. So what about public transportation for elderly in the suburbs? Oh, and may
Thank
I
you
say,
for that.
while you're thinking,
Go ahead.
I'm excited and thrilled to hear about all the plans that you're doing for the poor and for everyone else. So that's what I said, oh, what about me? So can you help me?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question, Patricia. Learn more about our plan at keepusamoving.com. But Patricia asked Jeff, what is our plan for serving elderly residents and expanding service and mobility options for elderly residents in San Antonio? Go ahead, Jeff.
So that third piece I keep talking about, Via Link service, which is that demand response type service, that Uber-like service, it is fully accessible. And our current plan would expand the area in which we provide accessible service by 30%. And that's a significant increase. One would be able to use that service, again, anywhere internal to that area or linked to a regular Via Trans type vehicle once you got into the service area. So we're really looking at expanding mobility for everyone. We recognize that in addition to people who don't have cars, there are also people who can't drive a car, right? As Patricia, as you're saying, you're looking forward and seeing that you may not be able to continue driving a car. And so we're designing our system to serve all those needs. You're at the heart of our system.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And just so everyone is aware, about 18% of VIA riders are age 55 or older. And currently, in addition to qualifying for reduced rates on fares and passes, seniors ages 62 and older only pay 25 cents per trip, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they get free rides Saturdays and Sundays. So when we talk about a plan that's designed to expand our service area by 30%, that is also an expansion of our free and reduced fare programs for seniors. And the mobility on demand option will certainly be hopefully a more cost-effective option than rideshare, because you'll be able to get to where you need to go for the cost of a bus fare. Okay, I'd like to turn back to you, Representative Bernal. We have Representative Diego Bernal, who represents House District 123 with us. As a state rep, you visited every single public school in your district. You wrote reports about what they had to say, and you even served as a special designee to the Governor's Commission on School Funding. Based on your observations during this process, does transit play a part in the inequities in our school system? And if so, how?
It plays a tremendous role. It's no secret, as we've said so many times tonight, that our city is an economically segregated one, and that bears out in people's experiences, and it bears out in where they live. And so a lot of school districts, and the state law says that you can't offer bus service unless the student lives 2 miles away from the campus. And so for a lot of kids whose parents don't have cars, they depend on the bus or they walk to get to school. If you don't have safe, reliable, frequent transit, they're not going to show up, or they're going to show up late. And especially on days where the weather's bad, I heard this a lot, especially on days where the weather's bad, they won't show up at all. And some principals used extra funding they had to charter buses or charter small vans to go to certain areas that were within 2 miles of the campus, but where bus service wasn't there or wasn't frequent enough. And in doing so, they were able to increase their attendance by 5 to 8%, which in a campus is a tremendous amount. So if you're able to fill that gap, if you're able to make up for that inequity, if you're able to provide transportation for students to get them from where they live to campus in a safe and frequent way, then not only does attendance go up, but they spend more time in the classroom and their performance evens out, and they are able to start to equalize some of the educational inequities that we have. So I heard it from everywhere, from parents, from students, from educators, that it's a big deal, and it'll continue to be a big deal. And the only way to fix it is to fix it.
Jeff, I know VIA has certainly tried to do its part when it comes to providing more equitable opportunities for transportation for students. Would you like to talk about our free fare program for universities here in San Antonio?
Well, we do have a UPass program, University Pass program, and for a very, very, very nominal fee that the universities are picking up, the student can use their ID, or they have a pass issued that they can ride the system for free 24/7. So that's very, very flexible and university students typically are looking to try and find any way they can to save, because they're going to school and often having to work at the same time. And picking up on that, I just want to also pick up on something that Representative Bernal just spoke about, the impact of transportation and public transportation on education, because there's a second element, and Lily alluded to that just a short time ago, which is that one of the strongest indicators or contributors to academic success is parental involvement in the schooling and doing the homework, et cetera. And so when parents are spending 2 or 3 hours getting to and from an 8-hour job, it doesn't often provide them much opportunity to be able to provide that kind of parental support. And so it's kind of almost an unintended consequence or an ancillary disbenefit that if a person is relying upon public transportation and it is not a high quality service, then by virtue of that fact, they're not going to be as available to assist their children at home, for example, with their academics. And so that's kind of a secondary impact of transportation on the success of education.
That's a great point. Until I worked at VIA, I've been at VIA for about a year now, I had no idea how many public school students took the bus because they didn't have a vehicle in the home, or the one vehicle in their home was being used by their parent to get to work. It honestly just never occurred to me, just because I think we tend to be so vehicle reliant here in San Antonio. And we have a great video on the keepasamoving.com website of Maria Garcia. She was the salutatorian of the Young Women's Leadership Academy, and she was able to take the bus from the South Side to get to her school for many years and ultimately graduate. She's going to be starting, if she hasn't already started, at MIT. And her principal told us that over 30% of the students at the Young Women's Leadership Academy took the bus to get to school. And it was really eye-opening to me that the bus indeed was a vehicle for that educational opportunity. Okay, so we have over 1,500 participants tonight. Thank you for joining us. This is a live interactive event. Press *3 if you'd like to get into the queue to ask a question, or if you're watching live, we're tracking the streaming players, so just write your question beneath your streaming player. And I'd like to go now to Charles. Go ahead, you're live, Charles.
Yes, I have a question. I mean, I agree VIA needs upgrade and redone. And basically, when I was a kid, I was born and raised in Chicago. We had a great public transportation system. I lived there many, many years ago. Okay, my question is, they want to take the VIA protection tax and switch it over to support VIA, and then later on borrow money to pay for aquifer protection. Why not leave the aquifer protection tax in place and borrow money to upgrade VIA?
Thank you for that question, Charles. Jeff, would you like to share some information about both the referendum items that Charles referenced and VIA's options for additional funding?
So first of all, the state of Texas really provides one mechanism for MTAs like VIA to be funded, and that is the local portion of sales tax. That is the only mechanism that is provided for VIA to fund public transportation, or for any of the MTAs for that matter. And there are two factors on the figure into that. The first is that the legislature allows MTAs up to a 1% sales tax, so that we could go to a full percent. We're currently at 5/8 of a cent, just as a piece of background. And then the second factor is that the local sales tax piece can only be 2 cents. So the city of San Antonio has 1 cent. We have 5/8 of a cent. There's another piece that goes to the city and the county out of the Advanced Transportation District. And then pre-K for SA has a 1/8 cent. And currently, aquifer protection and linear creekways is funded with the other 1/8 cent. That 1/8 cent will run out when a certain level of dollars are reached, and that's anticipated to fall maybe sometime next year. There are a number of opportunities for funding aquifer protection and linear creeks, and our local leaders are really developing those. And I believe council was to vote, or is to vote, at least on the aquifer protection as part of their budget process tomorrow. So the 1/8 cent that we are looking at that would be vacated is actually, there are two pieces that would go to that. So between the end of aquifer protection and the end of 2025, so that would basically be between the middle of 21 and the end of 25, the voters will be asked to look at a workforce development program that would be run by the city. And so VIA's funding during that period of time would remain constant where we are today, relatively constant. But then on January 1st, 2026, that sales tax could then become available to VIA. And that would be a second vote. In fact, I believe it's the last item on a long ballot, which will ask the voters whether they will approve moving that 1/8 cent then over to VIA in 2026. So there will be two completely separate votes on the ballot, both of them associated with that same sales tax capacity that would work back to back.
Thank you, Jeff. So this is about it's not necessarily about cutting off funding sources. It's about realigning funding sources based on the limitation we have as a transit agency. The state legislature only designated this 1 cent of sales tax for the use of public transit. So unfortunately, we're limited to that 1 cent when it comes to additional revenue, whereas other important community priorities have a number of different alternative funding sources. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that describes it very nicely.
Okay, well, we have over 1,500 participants tonight. If you just joined us, it's an interactive forum. We want to hear your questions. Press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. Or if you're watching live stream, enter your question below the live stream player, and we are going to try to get to as many questions as possible tonight. I'd like to go ahead and move to our next poll question. And the question is, among the goals and objectives of the Keep SA Moving plan, which do you think would have the most impact? Press 1 for connecting more people to jobs and services. Press 2 for decreasing travel time and increasing frequency. And press 3 for investing in innovative ideas that make transit easier. Again, of all the goals and objectives of the Keep SA Moving plan that you've heard tonight, which do you think would have the most impact? Press 1 for connecting more people to jobs and services. Press 2 for decreasing travel time and increasing frequency. And press 3 for investing in innovative ideas that make transit easier. And while we tally up those poll results, Lily, I'd like to go ahead and go back to you. We have Lily, who holds a master's in social work. She is a demography expert and researcher. And Lily, in your role as an independent researcher and a graduate student in applied demography at UTSA, you co-authored the Status of Women in San Antonio report with Dr. Rogelio Saenz, and you also led 2 recent white papers analyzing almost 100,000 domestic violence cases in Bexar County, along with Dr. Roger Enriquez, the director of UTSA's Policy Studies Center. In your professional experience, does the lack of transportation have any impact on victims of domestic violence in our city? It's a big issue in our city. For example, I've read some studies saying that denying mobility is one way that abusers can hold victims captive. I'd love to hear your observations and your thoughts based on your past research.
So that's a great question, because as we know, San Antonio definitely experiences more domestic violence than we would be happy to report on. And we know that during the pandemic, not just here, but really every place in the country has been experiencing even more. But to take you back to before the pandemic, Patricia Castillo, who a lot of you know, who's been in the domestic violence advocacy community in San Antonio since 1979, just an amazing person, the co-founder and executive director at the Peace Initiative. She and her work partner were doing education programs for people who were first offenders. So they were in the Bexar County Jail and they had been arrested for a domestic violence offense. And they were given an opportunity, as I understand it, to take, like, let's say, an 8-week series of classes. And if they completed the classes successfully, they'd get a certificate, and then maybe their case wouldn't be pursued because it would count as what the jail time would have counted as. And I was super interested in domestic violence after studying all this stuff about the statistics. And I thought, let me hear from some people who are actually engaged in this process. So I asked her permission, and then the permission of the people in the class to go and observe. And I was there one Saturday morning, and there were about 12 people in the class, men and women, all different ages, lots of different life experiences, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I was blown away that after the class ended, literally everyone in the class was expressing some transportation issue. Like they had gotten a ride to the class, which basically was a court-mandated class, so they really wanted to be there. They had either gotten a ride and been dropped off and they weren't sure how they were going to get home. They didn't understand how to use the bus system. They were back with the perpetrator, even though that is basically not advisable at all, because that was their access to transportation. I was just completely shocked by what a prevalent issue that was, and how, if you think about it as a community, we really want people, we want to be able to treat perpetrators, and we want to, see that they learn some cool stuff and are able to not reoffend. But what if underneath this, some of the people who are dropping out of the program and not being able to complete it, it's literally coming down to their transportation obstacles? That's something that we as a city ought to just make sure isn't even an issue, because this is education that's super valuable. It can change people's lives and it can save people's lives. So that was just a very startling observation to make by working with people literally involved in it.
Thank you for that. Representative Bernal, we've had a lot of community conversations about domestic violence over the course of, for a long time now, but there's been some special attention paid to it and a commission formed over the course of the past year or two. Any thoughts on Lily's observations there?
Well, I think it's fantastic work, but I think it also goes back to this overarching theme that we're talking about, which is the amount and percent of poverty in our city. It's no secret. It's no wonder that the city with the highest percent of people living below the federal poverty line also leads the nation in incidents of domestic violence per capita. Those two things go hand in hand. And as you start to unravel them. As you start to address one, it necessarily addresses the other. And as I said before, one of the ways to address poverty at scale is transportation. In fact, one of the foremost researchers on poverty, Raj Chetty, out of Harvard, he talks about the transition out of poverty as being something sort of long. It's not a moment-to-moment thing. It's not an off-on switch. It's a spectrum. And the term that he uses is social mobility. And he says literally mobility, transportation is one of the largest and most effective system-wide approaches to dismantling poverty that there is. And so as we do that, we will see absolutely incidents of domestic violence go down. You cannot address one without the other. So what Lily is saying ties in perfectly with the conversation we're having in general about poverty. And if we want to address one, we have to address the other. There's no way to talk about them separately.
Thank you for that, Representative Bernal and Lily Casura. I have the results of our second poll back. The question was, among the goals and objectives of the Keep SA Moving plan, which do you think would have the most impact? 44% of participants tonight said that they believe connecting more people to jobs and services would have the most impact. About 28% said decreasing travel time and increasing frequency would have the most impact. And 28% said investing in ideas that make transit easier. That was the goal and objective of the Keep SA Moving plan that they thought would have the most impact. And I have a question here from Cosima Colvin online. Cosima, thank you for joining us tonight. Really wonderful volunteer, community activist, active member of the Tier 1 Neighborhood Coalition. And Cosima's asking, is there some place the public can go to see VIA's plan for how it will spend the additional $38 million a year that they hope to collect from the sales tax? For example, how much to adding shelters at bus stops, how much to route increases, etc. Jeff, well, first of all, I would like to say, if you would like a presentation for your community organization where you can talk in depth with a VIA staff member about the plan and get your questions answered, go to keepsamoving.com to request a presentation. But if you're someone who just wants some general information, Jeff, would you like to talk a little bit more about where that information can be found?
Marisa, I believe it is on the website, Keep SA Moving website. I could also briefly address the question specifically because you've heard this several times this evening, that so much of what we're all doing is a system. So for example, when we put in VIA Link service on the northeast side of town, we had 3 bus routes, each of which ran once an hour. So we took those 3 bus routes out and we put the VIA Link service in. Now, the 3 bus routes we took out, those buses we put into increased frequency inside the network, right? If we count that as a VIA Link service, it completely obfuscates the fact that we also increase frequency as a result of doing that. So it's very difficult to separate out the increasing of frequency and the increasing of VIA Link and coverage. What I will tell you, probably the easiest way to explain it, is that the Keep SA Moving plan with respect to bus frequency, we will have no bus service that operates any greater frequency, any lesser frequency than every 30 minutes in either the peak or the midday. So that's a significant increase. When I first came to VIA, I think we had almost a third of our routes ran once an hour. And so we're really pumping into that frequency part. Then on the other side, the coverage part and the flexibility part, we currently have 1 MOD zone, or VIA Link service as we call it. And our plan has us adding 15 to 20 by the time we're done. So we have a very broad application of that $38 million to both increase our core service and increase that coverage and that flexibility, plus begin working on an ART project, which is in many ways like increasing bus frequency.
Thank you. And just to be clear for our callers tonight, the Advanced Transportation District, the ATD board, which is the same constitution as the VIA board, and the City Council have placed separate referendums on the ballot in the November general election. these referendums ask voters to consider initially shifting a 1/8 cent sales tax to workforce assistance and education programs that would be sponsored by or run through the city. And then after 4 years, the tax would shift to be in perpetuity starting in 2026. So again, this is a reallocation of an existing 1/8 cent sales tax. It would not. It's not framed as a tax increase. It's not a tax increase. And Cosima, I think in your question, you're asking for sort of like an itemization of how exactly the money would be spent. And just want to make it clear that if VIA receives additional funding, there would be a separate planning and community engagement process to map out those details at that point. But right now we have a framework with elements and guiding principles, and that plan is available at keepsamoving.com. And we're also happy to provide a presentation for community groups. If you'd like to request one, again, you can go to the website. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and go to one of our live callers. Judy, go ahead, you're live.
Yes, I have so many things. I guess I could keep you busy for an hour. But, you know, I listened to the presentation about what's going to be on the ballot, and I'm still a little confused. I guess I need to call my city councilman about, I understand that right now it costs maybe $635 or $650 to take one person anywhere, and that's way above the $125 fare, if that's what the fare still is. So just to keep even with where we are and to keep from going in further debt, they're going to have enough to finance that, right? Now, this idea of having individual cars or small vans go out and pick up people and take them to a major bus route, that's wonderful. However, I know the cab people are going to complain, and the cabs can sometimes cost $50 to ride around in San Antonio, so they've caused their own problem. But the elderly can't even get a discount fare on cabs, that'd be something else. They get a contract with the city. Why can't they do something for the elderly in the cab, see? And the Uber people, I don't know what they charge. Yes.
Judy, I'm sorry. We only have 8 minutes left tonight. Do you have a question for our panelists this evening?
Well, how much more money are we going to have? And I think that we ought to forget about these river routes and these linear parks. Riding bicycles is a sport. People are not going to ride a bicycle to work in 100-degree heat. So that's very silly. They're not going to do it. So they may take a bike on the bus, which is a great idea, but it's going to cost way more than we're talking about here just to break even, right? It's already costing. Is it correct?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Judy. And Jeff, Judy was asking if we receive an additional investment, how exactly would that money be used?
Well, of course, that money would fund those services that I just mentioned, but I would like to kind of speak to a couple things. First of all, with respect to the cab industry, the service that we're running, the VIA Link service right now that we're running, is delivered by Yellow Cab. So we're making use of the private sector in providing those services. The second thing is that the cost per trip that Judy quoted, which was $6-something, is reflective of COVID levels of ridership, which are half of normal. So you can imagine that with the same level of service, you return to normal levels of ridership, and that cost per rider drops significantly. And then when you look at the VIA Link service, that operates at 30% less than what the fixed route service did before. So we're constantly working at carrying as many people as we can with the dollars that we have. And in fact, Texas Transportation Institute out of Texas A&M University generated a list of 12 agencies as a peer group, and VIA is one of those. And if you look at the cost to deliver an hour of bus service, among those 12 agencies, we are the second lowest next to Orlando. And then if you look at how many people we carry for every unit of service we put out there, of those 12 agencies, we are number one. We carry more people than any of the others in our peer group. So we're running an economic service, that's efficiency, and we're running an effective service in that for every unit of service we put out there, we're getting the highest level of result from among our peer group.
Thank you. I'm going to go to right now to our last poll question of the evening. We're getting close to the end of our time. And as we wrap up our discussion on social equity and social justice, it's important to paint a picture of who the typical VIA rider is. I want to leave all of our participants tonight with information about who our VIA rider is. Based on the results of a 2019 survey, we've determined that the average VIA rider is employed full-time and works at least one weekend day. The average rider uses VIA services 5 to 7 days a week, does not have access to a personal vehicle, and lives below the poverty line of a household income of $25,000 annually. So VIA is moving San Antonio workers. The Keep SA Moving plan is designed to expand access to opportunity, including for those who want to participate in workforce development and job training programs, educational opportunities, and accessing higher wage jobs. The question is, do you agree with VIA's plan to ensure the best possible service for those who depend on it? Do you agree with VIA's plan that is designed to ensure the best possible services for those who depend on it? Press 1 if you agree, 2 if you disagree, and 3 if you're unsure. And while we're tallying up those poll results, like I said, we're getting close to the end of our time tonight. Representative Diego Bernal, I'd love your final thoughts in 30 seconds or less.
Sure. I think my final thoughts are the ones I started with, which is we've got tremendous system-wide challenges, and the only way to meet those challenges is with system-wide solutions. And I believe public transit is part of that. The research supports that public transit is part of that. And so I'd like, all of us just to think about this idea that we're not going to create something small, we're not going to do something that's cosmetic or for the pageantry or politics of it. But public transit is a system-wide solution to a system-wide problem. And that's sort of the direction we need to go as a city if we're going to get ourselves off from the top or the bottom of all of these terrible lists.
Thank you. Lily Casura, you're a demography expert and researcher trained at UTSA and Harvard. Do you have final thoughts for us in 30 seconds or less?
Years or older who live below the poverty level. And it would be great to see VIA be able to expand to serve even more people. It seems like the sky's the limit with that. It would help an awful lot of people.
Thank you. Jeff Arndt, President and CEO of VIA, final thoughts for us this evening.
Very simply, I think that VIA views serving this community and particularly serving people without vehicles as a part of our sacred mission. And so remember, if you will, that Keep SA Moving can be summed up in 3 words: frequent, fast, and flexible.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And, our final poll question of the night was whether or not you agree with VIA's plan to ensure the best possible service for those who depend on it. 84% of our participants agreed with that mission. None said they disagreed, and 16% said they're unsure. If you're unsure, go to our website, keepsamoving.com. We'd love to provide you with some more information. We are at the end of our live event this evening. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this important conversation. We appreciate the opportunity to speak directly with you and answer your questions. If we weren't able to get to your question this evening, you can leave a voicemail after the event by staying on the call when we end, and you'll be transferred into a private voicemail system. You can also send us an email at keepsamoving@viainfo.net or call our office at 210-517-4715. We'll be hosting more of these events in the future. Go to keepsamoving.com to register and stay updated on future events. We want to keep you informed on what we're up to and what's going to happen next. Thank you again, and have a great evening.